You never know what's going to happen, of course. When you're on the phones and chatting away during a show, Richard Tice has called us, and he's on the line now, because something you were listening to, Richard, you picked up on.
Hi there, Ian. Good afternoon.
Afternoon.
Yeah, just picking up on these numbers from the ONS that 48,000 people in England and Wales sadly died of COVID. There's something wrong with that, Ian, because the government data for the whole of the UK is 42,500 deaths. So there's a big gap there.
What is that gap? Because we were looking at that and we couldn't work out what the reason was for that.
Well, it's a good question. Then the other key thing, of course, is that anybody who died with COVID, that's what went on the death certificate.
Yeah.
Whereas, of course, if COVID hadn't existed, the likelihood is that a large number of those people who died, particularly bearing in mind that the average age of death is 82, many of those would have been put on their death certificate. Cause of death would have been pneumonia or a flu.
That's
true. I suspect that the comparison or that particular piece of data that's running on your news is actually not that relevant and not that helpful.
It's funny because it is. We've been talking a lot this afternoon, Richard, about the kind of incredibly confusing picture, and I know that you've spoken about this before. What are you making of the wider issue of what is happening? More lockdowns likely to be on the way, more disruption for businesses as a result of that. But simultaneously, I've been banging on about this all afternoon. I'm getting people contact me saying, but there's more people dying and more people in ICU and more people getting it. So you have to consider that.
Well, I think you've got to put it in context. And unfortunately, nobody in government is reminding everybody that sadly, but the reality is 1,650 people die every single day here in the UK. So every death's a tragedy, of course, to the family, the loved ones and the friends. But we've currently got about 40 to 50 people dying with COVID every day. That's about 3%. 3%, Ian, of average daily deaths.
Yep.
Cancer deals with 300. We don't shut down the economy. We don't ruin young people's lives, whether it's at university or at school, because of cancer deaths, mainly to more elderly people. It's about putting it in perspective and context. And what's actually going on is hospitalization rates are creeping up. The death rate is creeping up, but it's much, much lower thanks to the incredible work that surgeons and doctors, chemists and nurses have done. We've got remdesivir, we've got dexamethasone, we've got these CPAP, air pressure machines, we've got proning techniques. There's so much good news out there, which is why the death rate is so much lower, thankfully.
Yeah.
And the government is continuing to scare people and terrify people when actually they should be giving confidence to people and say, look, yes, it's dangerous to a tiny minority of the population, but to the vast majority, you'll either have no symptoms or some unpleasant, bad flu-like symptoms.
Yeah.
And it's a question of presentation and context. And if the government presented it in that way, I think the nation would be in a wholly different place, and we wouldn't be being scared witless by the Empress Nicola Sturgeon.
Do you think? Yeah, she's quite something, isn't she? Do you think that Boris Johnson is just scared, Richard? Is it almost as simple as that? That he's not quite sure what to do.
Look, we can all understand that Boris has been personally, hugely affected by this. But, we need in our leaders some courage, some grit, and I'm afraid I really worry that we've actually got a cabinet of cowards at the moment who are simply not recognising that the only guarantee in life, sadly, is that life will come to an end at some point. And when the nation is reminded that the average age of death due to COVID is the same as the average life expectancy between 81 and 82,
interesting.
It does put things in context. And it needs to be properly explained to people. I think the government's some members of the cabinet seem to be rather enjoying ordering people around and telling them what to do. I mean, some of the stories are tragic. I've heard of an 88-year-old woman who hanged herself. She hanged herself because she was so depressed at not being able to see her grandchildren. I mean, this is what this government is doing to this nation. And I really desperately worry. And to finish it, I actually worry that the divide in the nation between the petrified and the furious could end up being worse than the Brexit divide, and that would be a terrible place to end up.
You're not wrong. It's a poignant point to finish on. Richard, thank you. Appreciated. Richard Tice, who just happened to be listening and called us on the on the back of that story. He's, of course, a businessman and the chairman of the Brexit Party. Again, it's about context, isn't it? And which way do you... I hate to use the word spin when we're talking about potential life and death, but it is ultimately which way you look at a certain figure. Had we not had COVID, would all of those deaths have occurred mostly anyway, but have been pneumonia would have been applied in that respect, because how something's put on a death certificate has been the subject to much questioning as well.